By the time I was in the open-air adult movie business, it was fading fast. High production costs were being replaced by cheap videos, and any attempt at real filmmaking was gone. And it was then that we saw our audience of college-educated, trendy people disappearing. Now we were seeing a rougher crowd, more rusty pickups, fewer expensive sedans. And our need for security people was increasingly important. And our calls to the state police were also becoming more frequent.
That's Jim Bourey from Dickinson Center, and today we're taking a trip to a porno drive-in movie theater. From NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing, this is the Howl Podcast. I'm Ethan Shanty. Okay, so welcome to Season 3 of the show. I'm so glad that you're back with us again. And right at the top, I gotta tell you that this season is gonna be a little different. We're still featuring true stories told live on stages all over the North Country, but for the first time, we're also inviting storytellers into the NCPR studios to tell us their tale without a time limit. I want to pull the curtain back a little bit and tell you that we travel all over northern New York to host live story slams, and a lot of those recordings and stories make it on to the show. There's a couple of rules at those slams. First, stories must be true, obviously, but they also have to be told without notes and in under 5 minutes. If a person wins a regional story slam and goes to the Grand Slam at the end of the year, they get a few more minutes to tell their story. I've encountered so many great storytellers doing this show, and I thought, why not break the rules a little bit and bring people in and have them tell a story without a time limit. So we'll get to Jim's story in just a second, but wait one more moment. I have to tell you this. You probably don't know that this show and everything that happens at NCPR is dependent upon support from our listeners. It takes money to make this show happen. We have to travel, we have to write, we have to record, we have to edit, and those things have gotten more expensive this last year. So I'm asking you right now, or as soon as the show is over, to head to ncpr.org/give and make a donation. Maybe that's just $5 or $10, but if you could afford it, become a sustainer and give a monthly donation just like you do for streaming services. You'll be ensuring that we can continue to bring you great stories like the Howl Podcast. You'll be supporting everything else that NCPR does too, from award-winning reporting to our great music programs, and of course, shows just like the Howl. Head to ncpr.org/give, and seriously, thank you so much. All right, so let's get to what you came to this show for. I used to work at a movie theater in Potsdam. A couple of times I worked there, actually. That last stretch was kind of a transition period. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, and then he was in a coma. And so the memories of working there are mostly a lot of sleepless nights and my anxiety being at an all-time high. But I did have some good times there, mostly in college when I was an assistant manager, letting my friends into the movies for free, smoking on the roof of the theater before midnight movies. And I could say confidently that I was one of the last people in America to be trained how to thread film through a projector. It's not something that you think about if you're just sitting there, but movies now all come on hard drives, and threading film, keeping it all running smoothly, not binding up or ripping apart, is kind of a lost art. They just don't do it anymore. And like any job you leave, and for good reason, you're bound to remember the stuff that stressed you out. Like in 2012, we had that microburst that ripped the roof off of the hardware store down the street. The power went out in the theater where I was working, and there was a literal waterfall coming down into the lobby. And it was up to me, a minimum wage employee, to keep everyone safe, away from the water, away from the gigantic plate glass windows up front. Or the time that I was closing up for the night and I found a guy passed out on the bathroom floor. He was laying under one of the urinals after cracking his head on the wall. There's a little spot of blood under him. And by the time I got 911 on the line, the guy had gotten up, walked out, and stumbled into the alleyway. I told the 911 operator, the guy just walked out. And she told me to follow him and try to get him to sit down until paramedics could come. When I got outside, he was already sitting up on the curb and mumbling to himself. The cops and paramedics showed up just like a minute later. They were right down the street. And a cop told me, yeah, kid, you can go back to work. This happens all the time with this guy. It was just part of the, quote unquote, other duties as assigned that came with being an assistant manager there. Keep the films running on time, keep the drunks from dying on the floor, sweep up the popcorn, all for minimum wage. And as they say, it's all funny later, right? It gave me a lot of stuff to talk about when Jim Bourey joined me in the studio. Jim's a guy that I met in local poetry circles, and one time when I met him for coffee and to buy a book of his poetry, I asked him just how the hell he got into writing poetry so late in life. I mean, he's in his 60s when he started, and he started walking me through his path. husband, dad, manager of an adult movie theater, plumbing wholesaler, and I stopped him and I said, "Wait, manager of an adult drive-in movie theater?" And yes, an adult drive-in movie theater is exactly what you think it is. Porn movies, huge screen, outside. And he proceeded to tell me the story that you're about to hear. I don't know what you picture in your head when you hear manager of an adult drive-in movie theater, but it's probably not Jim. Actually, it's probably closer to a guy like me. Kind of gruff-looking, bald, covered in tattoos, a cigarette tucked behind his ear. And Jim is none of those things. He's soft-spoken, compassionate, tattoo-free as far as I know. And so I invited him into the studio to tell us his story and the other duties as assigned that came with being the manager of an adult drive-in movie theater. Here's Jim Bourey.
Hi, my name is Jim, and I'm a poet. But I've been many other things in my life, and I was a banker. I was an industrial salesperson. I was part of a management group at a steel forge plant, part owner of a music store, and I also was a plumbing and heating supply house manager, and other things too. Job stability wasn't my strong suit, but one of my jobs was a bit more unusual, and that was my short-lived career in the adult movie business. It's taken me a long time to work up the nerve to talk about that job in public, because that's not a place that would be considered politically correct. In fact, some folks would think it's downright evil. Now, just to clarify, I didn't appear in adult movies, and I wasn't on the creative side of the business either. No, my job was running the only adult film drive-in movie theater in the state of Delaware, perhaps in the entire eastern United States. I never checked the statistics on that. Now, I realize this is a shock to a lot of people who know me, and I ask for your tolerance and your forgiveness. Maybe if I give you a little preface to the story, you'll feel some sympathy. About 45 years ago, I uprooted my family, and we moved to Delaware to join my brother in his new music store business. That didn't pay so well, so we needed to have second jobs to put groceries on the table. And that's where my life in adult films begins. I was hired as a worker for the Diamond State Drive-In. My first duties were ticket sales, security patrol, and since the Air Force had trained me to run carbon arc movies projectors, I also substituted for the regular projectionist when he took a night off. And when the theater owner promoted the existing manager to a new multiplex operation, I was appointed manager of the drive-in, becoming the adult entertainment king of Delaware. This drive-in had started life as a regular outdoor theater owned by local folks, and it originally ran wholesome family movies and sometimes had live country music shows on the stage near the big screen. And they were big stars too, Ferlin Husky, Hank Snow, Janie C. Riley, pretty much all forgotten now. And it was located just outside a small town on the main north-south highway, known as DuPont Highway. It runs right through the state. The theater was in the middle of a residential rural neighborhood, and it was surrounded by a chain-link fence, which was covered in tightly woven vines. And those vines, they flowered beautifully in the springtime, and they provided a privacy fence year-round. We had parking spots for about 150 cars. Each space had a post with a wire connected to a speaker that could be hooked onto your window. And at the back of the lot was a low concrete block building housing a snack bar, storage room, the manager's office. Close to that was another block building dug down into the dirt a little bit, which was the projection booth. And that was a hot, nasty place in the hot months. The ticket booth was out by the highway, alongside a lane that led back into the theater. When the old couple that started the theater retired, they sold the place to a woman named Muriel, who owned several theaters in the state. And it was this woman who, during a recession in the late 60s, switched from regular movies to an adult XXX format, which at the time was a rising trend. And by the time I was made manager in 1982, the place was an established, though declining, feature of entertainment in Delaware. Every night, and I mean every night, the show would go on. 7 days a week, holidays, snowstorms, hurricanes, the show went on. If we didn't have a customer on the lot by the end of the second reel, that's about 30 to 40 minutes, we could shut down the projectors and go home. But I can only recall 2 or 3 nights when no one showed up. Sometimes there might be only a couple cars on the lot, but usually there were more. And we had all-night monthly showings that we always had more than 100 cars. And we gave out free coffee and donuts at the end of the 6-movie all-nighter. That was a big draw, but a lot of people would only stay for 1 or 2 movies and then leave because there's just so much explicit sex you can stand on a big screen like that. And the movies were sexually explicit. They were made using regular big screen 35 millimeter film. Some had plots. Some were parodies of conventional movies. Some had costumes, for part of the movie anyway. And they all had a whole lot of intimate behavior. And they were made during the so-called golden age of adult movies, which was a 10 or 12 year period when filmmakers were testing the limits of free speech and community standards. Of course, there was a lot of money to be made with this stuff, too. And that went on until the VHS tapes came out, and you could see the movies in the privacy of your home, and that made the whole free speech argument kind of irrelevant. Our snack bar sold more than popcorn and Raisinets. In fact, people would come to the drive-in for a dinner and a show. We had a regular kitchen, big grill, deep fryer, soup pot. We sold cheeseburgers and hot dogs and French fries, chili, coffee, had a large menu, even had specials on weekends. And my snack bar was run by 2 gray-haired ladies. They were both named Virginia. They both had deep Southern accents. One had an elegant hairstyle and the other not so much. They both smoked Camel unfiltered cigarettes. They both were excellent cooks, and they each had a bunch of grandkids. They were poor, they were divorced, they were hard-shelled, soft-hearted, and worldly wise. And when things were slow, they would stand out in front of the building, smoking, making lewd comments about the on-screen activities. And they laughed so loud at their jokes, they sometimes got complaints for the customers. I ignored the complaints. It wasn't easy to find 2 reliable people with a good work ethic who could cook good food at a porno theater. Ticket sales on most nights were handled by another elderly woman named Mildred, and part of her job was making sure all the patrons were 21 or older. She'd ID anyone that was questionable, and if she thought somebody looked suspicious, she'd call security. We always had 1 or 2 security people on duty. And if the customers got more belligerent, the police would be called. The state police were never too far away. In fact, most nights, whoever was on duty in the area would drive in, get a free cup of coffee, chat with the Virginias, and then go back to the highway. Another essential part of our team, of course, was the projectionist, and his name was Lester. And he was an overweight, smelly individual, and his unpleasant aura filled the projection building. On the rare days that he took off, we did a fumigation and air cleaning of the place. We had to do that. Otherwise, we couldn't get substitutes to work in those conditions. Greasy Lester, that was a name he gave himself. He was a NASCAR fanatic who spouted statistics all the time, but he was a bright guy. He was a skilled electronic and mechanical technician, and he kept the old-fashioned sound system working as well as those tinny speakers would allow. I met a lot of people when I managed that drive-in. Politicians, preachers, teachers, school administrators, business people of all sorts, and military folks from the nearby air base. They were all patrons. And it wasn't just a male audience, especially on weekends. Adult movies had edged their way into the mainstream. A movie called Deep Throat started the trend back in the early 70s. It became chic to seem like a hip, open-minded moviegoer. And porn had become an attraction, at least for the adults. By the time I was in the open-air adult movie business, it was fading fast. High production costs were being replaced by cheap videos, and any attempt at real filmmaking was gone. And it was then that we saw our audience of college-educated, trendy people disappearing. Now we were seeing a rougher crowd, more rusty pickups, fewer expensive sedans. And our need for security people was increasingly important. And our calls to the state police were also becoming more frequent. We had to make calls for public intoxication, public urination, public lewd behavior, fighting. Once we had to call about an attack on a vehicle by a man with a grudge and a baseball bat. There was also harassment and even abandoned vehicles in the lot. The audience had gone from being interesting to being abusive and violent and often bizarre. And one night, it was a cold night, and a naked woman ran into the snack bar screaming for help. She was bleeding from cuts on her face, and she said her husband was beating her because she wouldn't do what he wanted. And so one of the Virginias quickly got a blanket from the storeroom and covered the woman, took her into the manager's office and locked the door. I called the police. The woman's husband came in, threatened to kill everyone, demanded that we give up his wife, and our security guard tried to calm Guy down. And then the state police car came roaring into the drive-in, followed by two more. The woman's husband was quickly cuffed and put into one of the cars, and an ambulance came and took the lady to the hospital, accompanied by a female police officer. I never heard about the outcome of that incident, and I always hoped that it ended well for her. 2 days after I had reported that incident, the new owners of the drive-in called to tell me we were closing the theater that night. It was it. And I was relieved. I was glad to be out of the porn business. I was transferred to a small, single-screen, second-run theater. A month later, one of the owners showed up at my new job asking me if I'd be willing to switch our format to adult films. He said, "It'll be another test of free speech rights." And our theater was close to a school and right next door to a church. And he said, "It might involve getting arrested." And I said no, and turned in my resignation. And the next day, I took a job in the plumbing supply business, and my career in adult movie business ended quietly and without regrets.
That was Jim Bourey, recorded in the NCPR studios in Canton, New York. He's a poet and the author of the book There and Back Again. I want to thank Jim so much for coming into the studio to tell us this story. I know it took a lot of courage to put all of that out there. And I want to thank you so much for joining us and coming back for Season 3. More great stories are coming up this season, so don't forget to click that follow button wherever you're listening, and we'll see you next week. The Howl is written, edited, and produced by me, Ethan Shanty. Script supervision is by David Summerstein. Doyle Dean is our production manager. Caitlin Kelly is our social media manager. And Bill Hanel is our digital guy. Our theme for the show is by famous letter writer of Plattsburgh. To hear more stories and to find out more about the Adirondack Center for Writing, who's our partner in this show, visit ncpr.org/howl. And seriously, while you're there, throw us a couple of bucks. It all makes a big difference and ensures that we can continue bringing you these amazing stories told right here in the North Country. For North Country Public Radio, I'm Ethan Shanty. This is NCPR.